Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather not merely to discuss a headline, but to reflect upon a moment that symbolizes the shifting tides of global power, diplomacy, and national pride. India's sovereignty is non-negotiable because it represents not just a principle of international law, but the very foundation of India's identity as a nation. From the struggles of colonial rule to the hard-won independence of 1947, the idea of sovereignty is deeply ingrained in the Indian psyche. Sovereignty means that India has the exclusive right to govern itself, to make its own policies, and to decide its own path without interference or dictation from outside powers. It means that India's choices, whether in foreign policy, defense, economy, or culture, are determined by the will of its people and its elected leadership, not by threats or pressures from other nations. To compromise on sovereignty would be to compromise on the sacrifices made by countless freedom fighters who envisioned an India that would stand proudly on its own feet, independent and self-reliant. In today's globalized world, sovereignty does not mean isolation. India engages actively with every major power, participates in international organizations, and contributes to solving global challenges. But engagement does not mean submission. While India values its partnership with countries like the United States, Russia, and those of Europe, it refuses to be anyone's subordinate. This is why India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, often stresses that India will do what is in India's best interest. Whether it is purchasing oil from Russia despite Western sanctions, building strong defense ties with multiple nations, or taking an independent stance on conflicts in other parts of the world, India has shown that it will never allow another nation to dictate its foreign policy. Sovereignty, in this sense, is not just a word, but an assertion of dignity, an affirmation that India's choices are its own and cannot be compromised. India's sovereignty also extends to its economic policies. As one of the world's fastest growing economies, India makes decisions that reflect its unique needs and challenges. When Western powers attempt to pressure India on trade practices, energy imports, or technology regulations, the reply is consistent: India will decide for itself what benefits its people. This approach has allowed India to balance relations with both East and West, becoming a key voice in the global South while maintaining strong ties with advanced economies. India's stance sends a powerful message: collaboration is welcome, but coercion will never succeed. Defense and national security are another sphere where sovereignty is absolute. India faces complex challenges from cross-border terrorism to regional rivalries, and it has developed its own strategies to safeguard its people. No external power can determine how India should defend itself, what weapons it should acquire, or which alliances it should form. When foreign leaders issue warnings or attempt to influence these choices, India responds firmly, making it clear that its defense strategy is guided only by its own national interest. This resolve demonstrates that sovereignty is not just a diplomatic posture, it is a shield that protects the very survival of the nation. Culturally and socially, sovereignty means preserving India's identity in a rapidly homogenizing world. India is proud of its traditions, languages, religions, and philosophies, and it refuses to let global narratives dictate how it should conduct its internal affairs. While India is open to ideas and cooperation, it draws the line when foreign governments or organizations attempt to interfere in domestic debates, whether on social policies, political choices, or cultural expressions. This insistence on internal autonomy reaffirms that sovereignty is also about protecting the values and heritage that make India unique. Sovereignty is not a slogan, it is a living principle that defines India's place in the world. A sovereign India is not an arrogant India, but a confident one ready to cooperate with others, but only on equal terms. It is willing to listen, but it will never be ordered. It is open to partnerships, but it will not be pressured into submission. That is why India's sovereignty is non-negotiable. It is the essence of independence, the legacy of its struggles, and the promise to its future generations that India will always stand tall, proud, and free in the community of nations. Partnerships must be equal, not hierarchical, because true cooperation between nations can only thrive when both sides respect each other's sovereignty, dignity, and interests. When one country treats another as a subordinate, the relationship ceases to be a partnership and becomes domination. History is filled with examples where powerful nations have tried to impose their will on weaker states, often through economic pressure, military intervention, or diplomatic coercion. Such arrangements may bring temporary compliance, but they never build trust, and they always sow seeds of resentment. In today's world, where power is shifting and emerging economies like India are playing an increasingly central role, the old model of hierarchical relations is no longer sustainable. Equal partnerships are not only desirable, they are necessary for stability, progress, and peace. India's foreign policy in recent years is a clear reflection of this philosophy. Whether dealing with the United States, Russia, Europe, or its neighbors in Asia, India emphasizes that dialogue must be conducted on the basis of mutual respect. India does not seek to dominate others, nor does it accept being dictated to. When American leaders issue warnings or European institutions attempt to pressure India on energy imports or human rights issues, New Delhi's response is consistent. Cooperation is welcome, but coercion will not be tolerated. By standing firm, India has shown that it values equality over dependency, asserting that a partnership cannot survive if one side insists on giving orders while the other is expected to simply obey. Equal partnerships also strengthen global stability. In a hierarchical arrangement, the dominant power often pursues its own narrow interests, while the weaker state is forced to compromise on its national priorities. This creates imbalance and fuels tensions. On the other hand, when countries work as equals, they recognize each other's concerns and work towards solutions that benefit both sides. For instance, India's growing role in multilateral forums like the G20, and the Quad highlights its belief that collective problem-solving works best when every voice has value, not just the voice of the most powerful. Equal partnerships allow for diverse perspectives, leading to more sustainable and inclusive outcomes on issues like climate change, trade, and global security. Economically, equal partnerships are vital in an era of globalization. Trade agreements, technology collaborations, and investment flows should not be structured in a way that gives undue advantage to one side at the expense of the other. India has been particularly vocal about resisting one-sided trade deals that would harm its domestic industries or compromise its development goals. Instead, it seeks arrangements that benefit its people while also respecting the interests of its partners. This balanced approach has allowed India to engage with both developed and developing nations, showing that fairness is the cornerstone of prosperity. In the realm of defense and strategic cooperation, equality is even more crucial. When powerful nations try to use military alliances as tools of control, smaller nations often feel trapped and insecure. India, however, has carved out an independent path by engaging with multiple partners without aligning exclusively with any one bloc. Its defense agreements with the United States, its long-standing ties with Russia, and its cooperation with European and Asian partners all demonstrate a clear principle. India will work with anyone, but always as an equal. This multi-alignment strategy not only safeguards India's autonomy, but also proves that balanced partnerships are more durable than hierarchical ones. At a cultural and ideological level, equal partnerships honor the diversity of civilizations. Every nation has its own values, traditions, and systems. For one country to impose its model on another is an act of arrogance. India has consistently resisted such pressures, asserting that its democratic system, social policies, and cultural heritage must be respected. This approach encourages dialogue rather than confrontation because equality allows space for different ideas to coexist. When nations meet as equals, they celebrate diversity rather than seek to erase it. The principle that partnerships must be equal, not hierarchical, is about creating a just and balanced world order. In the 21st century, no single power can claim dominance forever, and attempts to do so will only accelerate resistance from others. A multipolar world is emerging, where countries like India, China, Brazil, and others are rising alongside traditional powers. The only way forward is through cooperation built on equality, where no one dictates terms and no one accepts subordination. For India, this principle is not just diplomatic rhetoric, it is the foundation of its engagement with the world. Equal partnerships ensure dignity, mutual benefit, and long-term stability, while hierarchical arrangements belong to a past that must never return. India's bold reply shook Washington because it was not just a diplomatic response, but a defining statement of India's place in the new global order. For decades, the United States has been accustomed to a position of dominance, often expecting other nations to adjust their policies according to American interests. Warnings, sanctions, and political pressure have long been instruments in Washington's foreign policy toolbox, but when such pressure was directed toward India, the response was firm, confident, and unapologetic. It was a moment that reminded the world that India is no longer a country that can be lectured, coerced, or intimidated. Instead, it is a rising power whose decisions are guided by its own priorities. The reply from New Delhi, embodied by the calm but sharp words of External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, carried a weight that reverberated across Washington, challenging old assumptions about how the United States could influence India. What made this reply so impactful was not only its tone, but its timing. The global landscape today is in flux, with shifting alliances, new centers of power, and ongoing conflicts that demand diplomatic clarity. India has chosen to walk an independent path, balancing ties with the U.S. while maintaining strong relations with Russia, engaging with China on necessary fronts, and expanding its influence in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. When Washington attempted to frame India's choices as problematic or demanded alignment on sensitive issues, India's reply was straightforward. It will act according to its national interests, not under external instructions. This confidence sent a ripple through the American political establishment, which has often viewed strategic partnerships through the lens of hierarchy. The boldness of India's stance lies in its ability to push back without closing doors. India did not reject cooperation with the United States, but it made clear that cooperation must come on equal terms. This shook Washington because it disrupted a narrative where American policymakers assumed leverage. Instead, India's response placed the U.S. in a position where it had to reassess how to deal with New Delhi, not as a junior partner, but as a sovereign equal. In practical terms, this means the U.S. cannot expect India to simply adopt its sanctions policies, change its defense imports, or align its votes at international forums without question. Washington was forced to recognize that India is charting its own course and that any partnership will have to adapt to this new reality. The symbolism of this moment goes beyond bilateral relations. Around the world, many nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America have long felt the weight of Western pressure. By responding boldly to Washington, India gave voice to a broader sentiment that the era of unquestioned Western dominance is over. Smaller nations see in India's example a model of how to assert independence while still engaging constructively with global powers. This is why India's reply did not just echo in American media or think tanks, but became a talking point in capitals across the world. Washington was shaken not because it fears India, but because it realized that the rules of engagement are changing, and India is one of the main drivers of that change. Economically and strategically, India now has the leverage to take such bold positions. With its fast-growing economy, a massive consumer market, technological advancements, and a strong military. India cannot be treated as a dependent state. This self-assurance underpins every diplomatic interaction. Washington was unsettled because it encountered a partner that no longer feels the need to bend under pressure. Instead, India's reply highlighted that respect and equality must replace warnings and dictates if the partnership is to move forward. India's bold reply shook Washington because it was a turning point in perception. For the first time, the U.S. had to accept that India's rise is not something it can control, but something it must respect. The old language of warnings no longer works. The new reality demands dialogue on equal terms. India's stand was not merely a defense of its policies, but a declaration that it will no longer play by outdated power equations. It was a reminder that the world has changed, and that India is leading that change with confidence, dignity, and resolve. A new multipolar world order is emerging, and its rise signals one of the most significant shifts in international relations since the end of the Cold War. For much of the 20th century, global politics was defined by a bipolar struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the world entered what many described as a unipolar moment, where the United States stood as the sole superpower. For 3 decades, American influence shaped global trade, military alliances, technology, and even cultural norms, but that era is rapidly fading. The 21st century is being shaped by a redistribution of power, where no single nation can dominate the entire global system. Instead, multiple centers of power, both established and emerging, are beginning to define the future. This multipolar order is evident in the rise of nations like India, China, Brazil, and others that have asserted themselves economically, politically, and militarily. The European Union, despite its internal challenges, continues to be a major economic and diplomatic force. Russia, though facing sanctions and setbacks, still maintains significant military and energy influence. At the same time, regional powers in the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia are no longer content to be passive players in global affairs. Together, these forces are reshaping international institutions, rewriting trade norms, and challenging the dominance of any single country. This is not just a geopolitical trend, it is a structural transformation of how power operates in the world. One of the defining features of this emerging order is that influence is now more distributed than ever before. Economic power is no longer concentrated in the West alone. Asia has become the engine of global growth, with China and India leading the way. Technology hubs are no longer confined to Silicon Valley, as innovation now emerges from Bangalore, Shenzhen, and Seoul. Energy politics has diversified as countries invest heavily in renewable energy while traditional oil producers seek to expand their influence in new ways. This shift creates a world where decision-making is more complex as multiple actors hold stakes in critical issues like climate change, cybersecurity, and supply chain security. India, in particular, embodies the promise and challenge of the multipolar world. With its massive population, growing economy, and increasing diplomatic clout, India is carving out a role that goes beyond regional influence. Unlike China, which has often been viewed with suspicion due to its assertive policies, India projects an image of partnership and balance. It engages with the United States, Europe, and Japan, while also maintaining strong ties with Russia, Africa, and the Middle East. India's refusal to align completely with any one power bloc highlights the essence of multipolarity, the freedom of nations to pursue independent strategies rather than being confined to one camp. This emerging order also reflects a change in how conflicts and cooperation are managed. In the past, the United States or the Soviet Union could dictate terms in global crisis. Today, however, conflicts in regions such as Ukraine, the South China Sea, or the Middle East cannot be addressed without involving multiple players. Organizations like BRICS and the G20 are gaining greater prominence because they provide platforms for diverse nations to negotiate and collaborate. This trend shows that the legitimacy of global governance now depends on inclusivity rather than dominance. Of course, a multipolar world is not without risks. With more power centers come more rivalries, overlapping interests, and potential for conflict. Unlike a bipolar or unipolar system where power equations were clearer, a multipolar order creates unpredictability, but it also creates resilience because no single power can dictate the rules unilaterally. Smaller nations, too, find greater space to assert themselves, building coalitions and partnerships that protect their interests. This diversity of power strengthens global democracy by ensuring that no one voice can drown out all others. The emergence of a multipolar world is not just a geopolitical reality, but also a philosophical shift. It recognizes that global challenges, climate change, pandemics, economic inequality, or technological disruption cannot be solved by one country alone. They require collective responsibility. The multipolar world pushes nations toward dialogue, compromise, and cooperation. It is not perfect, but it is more representative of the world's diversity and aspirations. In essence, the age of dominance is giving way to the age of balance. The United States will remain powerful, but it will have to share space with others. China will rise, but it cannot dictate terms unopposed. Europe, India, Russia, and other regional powers will continue to influence outcomes in ways that no global actor can ignore. This is the reality of the new multipolar order, an order that promises to be more contested, more dynamic, but ultimately more inclusive. The world is no longer shaped by one capital. It is shaped by many. India's strength comes from unity and growth, and together these two pillars define its resilience and rising status in the world. Unity is the foundation of India's identity, forged from centuries of diversity, struggle, and the pursuit of freedom. Growth, on the other hand, represents the nation's forward momentum, its ability to transform challenges into opportunities and aspirations into achievements. Alone, unity or growth may not be enough to sustain India's global rise, but when combined, they create a powerful force that not only secures India's future, but also inspires the world. India's unity is unique in its character. Few nations can claim the kind of cultural, linguistic, religious, and regional diversity that India embodies. From the snow-covered Himalayas in the north to the coastal plains of the south, from the deserts of Rajasthan to the fertile fields of Punjab and Bengal, India is a mosaic of traditions, ideas, and communities. Yet, despite this diversity, the nation has remained intact and vibrant, bound together by a shared sense of belonging and identity. This unity is not the absence of differences, but the strength to embrace them. The Indian Constitution, democratic values, and the spirit of tolerance ensure that people of countless backgrounds can live, work, and prosper under a single flag. This harmony in diversity is one of the greatest sources of India's resilience. But unity is not just cultural, it is also social and political. When Indians stand together, whether during natural disasters, external threats, or global crises, they demonstrate that collective willpower can overcome any obstacle. India's unity has been tested many times, from invasions to colonial exploitation, yet it has always emerged stronger. Today, as the world grows more polarized and fragmented, India's ability to hold together a billion-plus population across diverse lines sends a powerful message. It proves that unity is not a weakness to be managed, but a strength to be celebrated. Growth is the second pillar of India's strength. In the last 3 decades, India has transformed from a largely agrarian economy into one of the world's fastest growing economic powers. Its information technology sector, service industries, manufacturing, and agricultural innovation have created opportunities for millions. India's expanding middle class is driving consumption, while its entrepreneurs are leading in innovation, startups, and digital technology. India's growth story is not only about rising GDP figures, it is about lifting millions of people out of poverty, expanding access to education and healthcare, and creating an environment where dreams can be realized. Economic growth has also given India a stronger voice on the global stage. A growing economy means greater influence in trade negotiations, investment decisions, and international forums like the G20. It also provides the resources to strengthen defense, infrastructure, and scientific research. Growth allows India to invest in modern technologies such as space exploration, renewable energy, and artificial intelligence, positioning itself as a leader in areas that will define the future. This progress is not just for India's benefit, but contributes to the world by offering new models of development that combine modern innovation with sustainable practices. The true power of India lies in the synergy between unity and growth. Growth provides the material strength, jobs, industries, and resources, while unity ensures stability and harmony in the face of change. Without unity, growth could fragment society into conflict. Without growth, unity could become stagnant and frustrated. Together, they create a balance that fuels progress while protecting identity. This combination is what allows India to withstand external pressures, overcome internal challenges, and emerge as a nation of opportunity and resilience. The world recognizes this strength. Countries admire India's democratic unity and respect its economic rise. Investors see stability and opportunity, while global leaders acknowledge India's independent voice in diplomacy. When India takes positions on global issues, whether climate change, trade, or security, its words carry weight because they come from a nation rooted in unity and propelled by growth. India's future depends on protecting this balance. As the country continues to modernize, it must ensure that economic progress reaches all citizens and that unity is preserved amid rapid social changes. The path will not be free of obstacles, but history has shown that India's strength lies in overcoming adversity together. Unity ensures resilience, growth ensures momentum, and both together ensure greatness. Thus, India's strength does not come from wealth alone, nor from sheer numbers, nor from military might in isolation. It comes from the unity of its people and the growth of its nation, two forces that, when combined, make India not just a country of a billion voices, but a nation with a single, powerful message that progress and harmony can exist together, and that strength is born when diversity and development walk hand in hand. True power is dignity, not dominance, because history has shown time and again that those who rule through fear and force may achieve temporary control, but they rarely earn lasting respect. Dominance relies on coercion, intimidation, and subjugation, while dignity is rooted in self-respect, fairness, and moral strength. A nation or individual that operates with dignity commands influence not by instilling fear, but by inspiring trust and admiration. This difference lies at the heart of modern diplomacy and leadership. Dominance divides and provokes resistance, but dignity unites and creates loyalty. In the realm of international relations, dominance has often been the default approach of powerful states. Empires in the past sought to expand by military conquest, believing that might alone could secure authority. In more recent times, superpowers have attempted to dominate through economic leverage, political pressure, or sanctions. But these approaches create resentment as weaker nations eventually resist being treated as pawns. The collapse of colonial empires and the decline of unquestioned American unipolarity prove that dominance is unsustainable. By contrast, nations that treat others with dignity, acknowledging their sovereignty, respecting their choices, and engaging on equal terms, build alliances that endure. Power grounded in dignity is far stronger because it is not imposed from outside but freely recognized by others. For India, the principle that true power is dignity has been central to its rise on the global stage. India does not seek to dominate others, nor does it accept being dominated. Its foreign policy underlines that respect must be mutual, whether dealing with the United States, Russia, China, or its smaller neighbors. When India engages with the world, it does so as an equal partner, offering cooperation without subservience. This approach reflects the nation's civilizational heritage, which values dialogue, tolerance, and moral authority. India's voice carries weight not because it demands obedience, but because it stands firm on principles such as sovereignty, democracy, and inclusivity. Dignity also strengthens domestic unity. A nation where citizens are treated with fairness and equality becomes more resilient because people feel that their identity, culture, and rights are valued. Dominance within society, whether by one group over another or by rulers over citizens, leads to division, unrest, and ultimately weakness. India's democracy, though imperfect, is built on the recognition that every citizen's dignity matters. The strength of such a system lies in its ability to balance authority with accountability, ensuring that power serves people rather than subjugating them. On the global stage, true power through dignity manifests in how nations handle conflict and cooperation. Dominance seeks to impose solutions, often ignoring the perspectives of others. Dignity, however, seeks dialogue and compromise, ensuring that outcomes are fair and sustainable. For instance, India's stance on climate change highlights this balance. It recognizes global responsibility, but also asserts the right of developing nations to grow. By framing the issue in terms of fairness rather than submission, India gains respect while protecting its own interests. This is dignity in action, assertive, principled, but never domineering. Leadership rooted in dignity also has a moral dimension. Figures like Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and Martin Luther King Jr. proved that true power does not require violence or coercion. Their dignity, even in the face of oppression, inspired movements that reshaped nations. Such leaders demonstrated that the greatest authority comes from standing firm on principles without seeking to humiliate or dominate opponents. Nations that follow this path cultivate soft power, the ability to influence through culture, values, and ideas, rather than relying solely on military or economic coercion. The long-term test of power lies in endurance. Dominance may achieve compliance in the short term, but it breeds resistance that eventually undermines the dominator. Dignity, on the other hand, builds trust and cooperation that can last generations. The countries most admired in the world today are not those that dictate to others, but those that lead with respect, fairness, and vision. True power is not the ability to bend others to your will, but the ability to inspire them to walk beside you willingly. In the end, power without dignity is fragile, but dignity without dominance is enduring strength. India's example shows that a nation need not dominate others to be respected. It needs only to stand firm in its values, protect its sovereignty, and treat others as equals. This is the kind of power that shapes not only the present but also the future. True power, therefore, is not about how much force one can exert, but how much respect one can command by acting with dignity.